All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going into kind of a tricky area where student activism, free speech, and national security all kind of bump into each other.
Yeah, it's a sensitive topic.
It is. And we know you guys are interested in this. I mean, things are pretty heated out there politically right now.
Yeah.
So we've got this article, and it's titled, In Korean, Isi, Okosi.
Which, if you're not following along at home, translates to Trump Executive Order, Pro-Palestine Demonstration Student Visa Threat.
Catchy, right? And I'm super curious to get into it all with our expert here.
Well, I think the article does a really good job of looking into how foreign students are reacting to some of these executive orders that President Trump put out.
Right, and there are a lot of questions.
Oh, tons. I mean, how are we even defining support for terrorism?
Especially when we're talking about student activism, right?
Exactly.
And should universities be keeping tabs on their students?
And could peaceful protests actually lead to visa issues? Like, where's the line?
All questions we're going to tackle. And remember, folks, we're trying to stay neutral here.
Absolutely.
No taking sides, just laying out the different perspectives.
Just trying to understand what's going on.
Exactly. So let's get into the actual article. It's really focused on the reactions to two executive orders.
Yeah, two big ones. So the first one targets foreigners who are considered a threat to national security.
Which, okay, that makes sense on the surface.
Sure, but the order zeroes in on people who are seen as having, like, a hateful ideology.
Ah, so their beliefs.
Yeah, or if they're supporting, quote-unquote, designated foreign terrorist organizations.
Okay, and then there's the second order, which goes after Hamas sympathizers specifically.
Right, and that one aims to fight anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Interesting. So two different orders, but both pretty serious stuff.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And they both want immigration laws to be enforced way more strictly.
Which has some students worried about, well, losing their visas.
Or even getting deported, yeah.
I mean, I could see why students would be freaking out a little.
For sure.
And the article shows, like, a whole range of reactions, you know. Some foreign students, especially the ones from Gaza or who are active in pro-Palestinian movements, they're really anxious.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and the article even has this one student who was too afraid to go to a Palestine Night event.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, they were worried about being photographed and then facing consequences.
That's getting into self-censorship territory, right? If students are scared to speak up or even go to events, that's not good.
No, it kind of shuts down those important conversations that should be happening.
Especially on a college campus.
Right, exactly. But, to be fair, the article also mentions students who think the executive orders are a good thing.
Yeah, they say it's about keeping everyone on campus safe.
And that we need to stop any support for terrorist groups, period.
Which is, a valid concern.
For sure. But, like, how do you balance that with protecting individual liberties? That's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that's been around forever.
It feels like one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't situations.
It really does.
And a lot of students are worried about free speech in general.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're worried that these orders could be used to just shut down any protests.
Even if it's totally peaceful.
Right. Like, where's the line? One student even said they feel like they can't talk freely on campus anymore.
It does make you think, where's the line between supporting a cause and actually endorsing, violence or terrorism?
That's the million-dollar question. And the article points out how that lack of clarity is just stressing everyone out even more.
They're left wondering what they can even say or do without getting into trouble.
Exactly.
And get this, the article says that NPR reached out to a bunch of universities, but they all refused to comment on how they'd comply with this directive to monitor and report on students.
Wow. So they're just staying silent.
Basically. It just adds to the confusion,
You'd think they'd want to clear things up, especially with all this worry.
Right. It's weird. But while the universities are keeping quiet, pro-Israel groups are actually getting more tips, accusing students of supporting terrorist organizations.
See, that's what I mean about that line being blurry. Are they actually doing something, or are we just calling any criticism of Israel terrorism now?
That's a great point. And then there's this whole thing with the Purdue Exponent, the student newspaper at Purdue.
What happened there?
Well, they decided to give blanket anonymity to any student at a pro-Palestinian protest.
Trying to protect them, I guess.
Yeah. But some people are saying that allowing anonymity just makes it harder to hold people accountable.
Yeah, I see both sides of that.
It's a tough one for sure. So we've got students scared to talk, universities not saying anything, and these accusations flying around. It's a recipe for tension. Right?
Oh, huge tension. And this is where the legal stuff gets really interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, some legal experts say that kicking students out just for saying what they think would be a clear violation of the First Amendment.
Which, the First Amendment's a pretty big deal in America.
Huge.
But there's always another side, isn't there?
Always. The article also says that some people think these orders aren't about squashing free speech at all.
Okay, so what are they about then?
They say it's all about enforcing the immigration rules that are already in place.
So it's like they're sidestepping the whole free speech debate.
Exactly. They're turning it into an immigration issue.
It makes you wonder how the courts are going to interpret all this.
Oh, yeah. That's going to be fascinating to watch.
Totally. But I think what gets lost in all this legal back and forth is how much uncertainty it creates.
Yeah, it's that uncertainty that's causing all the anxiety.
For sure. Especially for someone like the grad student they talked about in the article. He's from the West Bank.
What about him?
Well, he knows it's risky, but he's planned to keep speaking out.
Wow.
He says staying silent when he sees injustice just isn't an option.
That takes guts.
It does. His story really makes this whole thing feel real, We're not just talking about, like, abstract legal concepts here.
So it's about real people's lives.
Exactly. These orders have serious consequences. It's affecting their education, their future, everything.
It's a good reminder, for sure.
And it's really powerful to see students who are willing to risk so much to stand up for what they believe in.
Absolutely.
But the article also mentions how this student went and contacted a free speech advocacy group, just in case.
Smart move.
Yeah, I guess having that legal backup is important.
Oh, for sure. But it is sad that it's even necessary.
It does feel like a step backwards in a way. So what does all this mean for the future of, like, student activism and free speech on campus?
Well, the article doesn't exactly have a crystal ball, but it shows us some trends.
And what are those?
Well, it looks like self-censorship among students is going up.
That's not good.
Yeah.
We talked about how that can create, like, a culture of fear.
Right, where everyone just conforms and no one wants to rock the boat.
Which, that kills the whole point of being on a college campus, doesn't it?
Totally. And the article also suggests that universities are caught between a rock and a hard place.
In what way?
Well, they want to support free speech, but they also have to follow these orders.
It's a tough spot to be in.
Totally. Especially with all these potential legal challenges coming down the pike.
Yeah, the courts are going to have a lot to say about all this.
Oh, for sure. And the First Amendment is going to be at the center of it all.
So this whole thing is far from over.
Not even close. But this article gives us a really good snapshot of what's happening right now.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So for our listeners out there who are diving into this topic, what are some key things they should remember?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that this isn't just some abstract debate.
Right.
This is about real students, real people who are anxious, afraid, and even facing deportation because of their political views.
It really highlights how important free speech is.
Yeah.
It's not something we could just assume
Yeah.
we have,
Correct.
We have to protect it.
Absolutely. And I think another key takeaway is that we need to think critically and be nuanced.
So no easy answers.
Not really. We have to be willing to look at different perspectives and grapple with the complexity of it all.
So it's not just about knowing the facts, but about how those facts can be interpreted in different ways.
Right. And being willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Which is never easy.
No, but it's important. And finally, this whole thing just shows how crucial it is to be engaged.
Like to actually get involved.
Yes. Whether it's activism, having conversations, or just staying informed, we all have a part to play in shaping the future of free speech and national security in our country.
So this is a call to action, folks. Be informed, be engaged citizens.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive into this sensitive topic, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. What stands out to you the most about this whole thing?
For me, it's how these orders are making students afraid to speak up. That's a big deal.
I get that. A university could be a place where people can freely express themselves, right?
Oh, absolutely. It should be a place for open inquiry and the free exchange of ideas.
I agree. And while I get the need for safety on campus, it does make you worried when free speech gets eroded like this.
Yeah, if it can happen on a college campus, where can it happen?
Right, it makes you think.
It does, and it brings up a big question that I think everyone should be asking themselves. How do we balance national security with protecting free speech, especially at universities?
That is the question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely something to think about. And we'll keep digging into it in part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll explore this complex issue even more.
It is a tough question, and this article really digs into some of the specifics. Like, it talks about designated foreign terrorist organization.
Yeah, what does that even mean?
Right. Like, how does a group end up on that list?
I mean, we hear that term all the time, but I'll admit I'm not totally clear on the details.
Well, so basically, the U.S. government has this list, right?
Okay.
And it includes groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, the big names.
Right, right.
And there's a whole bunch of criteria they use to decide who goes on the list. Yeah, like, have they been involved in terrorist activities that threaten the U.S.? Do they pose a risk to national security? Things like that.
So it's not just about whether a group has used violence, but if that violence is seen as a threat to the U.S. specifically.
Exactly. And once a group is labeled a foreign terrorist organization, that's a big deal.
I imagine.
Oh, yeah. It can really mess with their ability to raise money, travel, operate, all that.
And based on these executive orders, it affects anyone who's seen as supporting them, even if it's nonviolent support, right?
Right. And that brings us back to this whole question of how we're defining support.
Yeah, that's the fuzzy part.
Totally. The article says pro-Israel groups are getting more tips accusing students of supporting terrorism.
What does that even mean?
Right. Like, how much evidence do you need?
Is it just saying you sympathize with a cause, or are we talking about actually giving money or resources to a terrorist organization?
Exactly. And the article doesn't really say how these accusations are being looked at or what kind of proof they're using.
Which is part of the problem, right?
Oh, totally. That lack of transparency just makes people nervous.
Because they don't know what's okay and what's not.
Right. They don't know what might get them in trouble, so they just stay quiet.
Self-censorship again.
Yep, and that hurts academic freedom.
It prevents people from really digging into these tough conversations.
Especially when it comes to Israel and Palestine, it seems like people are extra cautious.
So we've got this unclear definition of support, universities that aren't explaining their monitoring policies, and students who are worried about getting in trouble for what they say. Where do we go from here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. It's messy.
For sure.
But I think one thing that would help is if universities were more upfront about their policies.
So, like, actually explain what they're doing.
Yeah, be clear about what support means in their eyes.
And make sure they're not stepping on students' First Amendment rights.
Right, exactly. I think that would calm people down a bit.
Make them feel less like they're walking on eggshells.
Definitely. And I think we also need a bigger conversation about this whole balance between national security and free speech on campuses.
And who should be part of that conversation?
Everyone. Students, faculty, administrators, legal experts, everyone needs to be at the table.
Sounds like a big table.
It is, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, students are dealing with the effects of these orders right now.
Like that grad student from the West Bank?
Yeah, him.
His story really got to me. It's inspiring to see someone so committed to speaking their truth.
Even with the risks.
Yeah, even knowing he could face consequences.
I think his decision to keep speaking out, even after reaching out to a free speech group for help, just shows how much he believes in this.
It's powerful. And it makes me wonder, what can individuals do to protect free speech, both for themselves and others?
That's a great question. I think it starts with education, knowing your rights.
Right, like what are you actually allowed to do?
Exactly. And there are organizations out there like the ACLU and FIRE that can help students if they're facing free speech issues.
So students aren't alone in this.
Not at all. And besides legal stuff, it's important to build support networks.
Like find people who get it.
Yeah. Join student groups. Talk to people who have different viewpoints.
So finding your people and having open conversations.
Exactly. Because protecting free speech is a team effort.
It's not just about speaking up for yourself, but for others too, even when you don't agree with them.
You got it. That's where tolerance comes in.
Right. Even if you don't like what someone's saying, you defend their right to say it.
Exactly. Because we need all those different ideas to have a healthy democracy.
Sometimes the ideas that make us the most uncomfortable are the ones we need to hear the most.
Truth. And that makes me think about the role of the media in all of this.
You're talking about the Purdue exponent giving anonymity to those students.
Yeah. It shows how tricky it is for journalists to cover these sensitive topics, especially when their sources could be in danger.
They want to protect people, but they also want to be transparent.
Right. It's a tough balance.
It is. And I think it's good for people to understand how these things work, how media coverage can be influenced by different factors.
Especially when you're dealing with controversial or risky topics.
So understanding the context is key.
Totally. And that takes us back to critical thinking. We can't just believe everything we read or hear.
We have to think for ourselves.
Exactly. Question your assumptions, look at things from different angles.
Don't just be a passive consumer of information.
Be active, engage with it. And that's why I think this deep dive is so helpful for our listeners.
It's giving them the tools to really think critically about this complex issue.
And hopefully inspiring them to keep learning more.
I hope so. So as we wrap up the second part, what surprised you the most about this whole topic?
Honestly, it's how scared and uncertain students are feeling right now.
Yeah, that's what got to me too.
It's sad to think that people are afraid to speak their minds on a college campus, you know?
It is. A college should be a place where you can explore different ideas and challenge yourself.
Exactly. But it just shows how important it is to fight for free speech, especially when things are so politically divided.
For sure. So I guess that leads us perfectly into the last part of our deep dive.
Where we'll look at some potential solutions and talk about how we can move forward in a way that protects both national security and our individual freedoms.
Yeah, finding that balance, it's not easy.
It really isn't. And the article kind of points out that this isn't just an American thing.
Oh, you mean other countries are dealing with this too?
Oh, yeah, totally. This tension between free speech and national security is a global issue, especially with, nationalism on the rise and all the worries about terrorism.
So maybe we can learn from other countries, see how they're handling it.
Absolutely. It's always good to compare, see what works, what doesn't.
Right, like what are they doing that we could try?
Well, some European countries have way stricter hate speech laws than we do in the U.S. Like, they'll actually ban speech that could incite violence or hatred against certain groups.
But then doesn't that bring up a whole other set of free speech issues?
Of course. It's all about finding that line, right? How do you define hate speech without, totally shutting down political debate? And how do you enforce it without freaking everyone out and making them afraid to say anything?
Sounds like the same balancing act we're talking about here.
Totally. But maybe by looking at what they've tried, we can at least learn from their mistakes,
Yeah.
Or see what worked well.
Right, avoid those pitfalls.
Exactly. And it shows that there's no magic solution that fits everyone.
One size doesn't fit all, right?
Exactly. We need to find solutions that work for us here in the U.S., given our own culture and politics.
So besides looking at other countries, are there things we can do here to fix the problems that the article brings up?
I think so. We've talked about universities needing to be more open about how they're monitoring students.
Yeah, being upfront about their policies.
Exactly. Say what they mean by support, Make sure they're not violating anyone's rights.
I think that would help students feel less stressed, like they know what the rules are.
Definitely. And universities need to make spaces where people can talk about these tough topics openly and respectfully,
So encourage real dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. They need to create a campus culture that welcomes different viewpoints.
And that takes a commitment from everyone, right?
Oh, yeah. Both the administration and the students need to be on board. It's about making a space where people feel safe to speak their minds, even if their opinions are controversial.
And that feeling of safety is so important for real dialogue, right? If you're scared of being punished or shut down, you're not going to say anything.
Exactly. And then you're not really learning anything, are you?
A university should be a place where you can really dig into tough questions and challenge what you think you know.
It's about being curious, being open to new ideas, not just going along with what everyone else is saying.
But this goes beyond just college campuses, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. These executive orders bring up questions about free speech and security for everyone, not just students.
Right. It's a bigger societal issue.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's a key point from this whole deep dive. This isn't just about laws. It's about who we are as a country, what we value.
It's about finding that balance where we can keep ourselves safe without giving up the freedoms that are so important to us.
You got it. And that means we all have to stay involved, stay informed, and hold our leaders accountable.
So it's our responsibility as citizens to stay engaged and make sure our rights are protected.
Absolutely. And that grad student from the West Bank, he's a good example of what that looks like.
Yeah, standing up for what you believe in, even when it's hard.
Even when it's scary. He could have just stayed quiet, but he's choosing to speak out, to make his voice heard.
It's inspiring, for sure. It shows that one person can make a difference.
They really can. And even when things seem impossible, we can't give up on fighting for freedom and justice.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive. It's been quite a journey exploring all the angles of this really important issue.
I agree. It's been a good one. And to our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to keep learning more about this.
This is just the beginning, right? There's always more to explore.
Exactly. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.
Those are the things that move us forward, both individually and as a society.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.